King David is one of the most influential figures in biblical history. His story shapes the identity of ancient Israel, the lineage of later kings, and the foundation of Jerusalem as a royal city. Yet for much of modern history, scholars asked a controversial question. Outside the Bible, did David actually exist as a historical figure? For decades, critics argued that David was a legendary character, created or exaggerated by later writers to legitimize political claims. According to this view, the biblical account reflected tradition, not history. Without external evidence, David was seen by some as a symbolic ancestor rather than a real king who ruled a unified kingdom. This skepticism was not rooted in hostility toward the Bible, but in methodology. Modern archaeology relies on physical evidence, inscriptions, monuments, artifacts, rather than literary tradition alone. If David truly ruled as a powerful king, critics asked, where was the proof left behind in stone or clay? For much of the 20th century, that proof seemed absent. Excavations across Israel uncovered cities, fortifications, and material culture, but none explicitly named David. As a result, the debate intensified. Some scholars suggested that David may have been a minor tribal leader whose legacy was later amplified. The issue was not whether Israel existed, but whether David belonged to verifiable history. Unlike figures such as Egyptian pharaohs or Assyrian kings, David appeared only in biblical texts. To skeptics, this absence of independent evidence raised serious doubts about the scale, and even the reality of his reign. Yet archaeology often moves slowly, and its silence is not always permanent. Many ancient names survive not because they were powerful, but because chance preserved them. Entire dynasties are known from a single inscription. History is full of figures who vanished simply because their records did not endure. What archaeologists look for is not confirmation of theology, but confirmation of existence. One clear external reference can reshape decades of debate, and in the case of David, such a reference would need to come from outside Israel, written by those with no interest in preserving his legacy. This is where the story takes a dramatic turn. In the early 1990s, a discovery in northern Israel would introduce a piece of evidence that few expected, and many immediately recognized as extraordinary. It was not a palace or a tomb, but a broken stone bearing words carved nearly 3,000 years ago. If you're interested in how a single archaeological discovery can transform long-standing historical debates, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Every video explores real evidence that reshapes what we think we know about the ancient world. The importance of this discovery lies not only in what it says, but in who wrote it. The inscription was not composed by Israelites honoring their own king. It came from an enemy kingdom, documenting conflict rather than celebration. This detail alone made scholars take notice. Suddenly, David was no longer confined to biblical tradition. His name, or at least his dynasty, appeared in an independent historical source. The implications were immediate and far-reaching. A figure once dismissed as legendary now demanded reconsideration. The debate did not end overnight. Scholars questioned the reading, the translation, and the context, but the discovery could not be ignored. It entered academic discussion as one of the most significant archaeological finds related to ancient Israel. As we continue, we'll examine the artifact itself, where it was found, how it was dated, and why its inscription changed the conversation about David forever. The evidence is fragmentary, but its impact is profound. The discovery that reshaped the debate over King David did not come from Jerusalem or Judah, but from the far north of ancient Israel. In 1993, during archaeological excavations at the site of Tel Dan, a team uncovered a fragment of a broken basalt stele reused in a later wall. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable, a common occurrence in archaeology where countless stones bear no readable inscription. As excavation continued, additional fragments were recovered over the following year. When these pieces were examined together, archaeologists realized they formed part of a larger monumental inscription. Carved in Aramaic, the text recorded a military victory by a foreign king over his enemies. This was not an Israelite inscription, but one commissioned by a rival power. Tel Dan itself was a strategic city. Located near major trade routes and borderlands, it was frequently contested between kingdoms. Control of Tel Dan meant influence over northern Israel. The inscription was likely erected to commemorate a decisive victory, making it both political propaganda and historical record. Scholars soon identified the author of the Stele as a king of Aram Damascus, most commonly associated with Hazael, who ruled in the 9th century BCE. This dating is supported by paleography, the study of ancient letter forms, as well as archaeological context. The style of the script aligns closely with other inscriptions from the same period. What immediately drew scholarly attention was a specific phrase preserved in the broken text. Among the lines describing defeated kings, the inscription references the House of David. This phrase was unprecedented outside biblical literature. It did not describe a myth or a legend, but a recognized political dynasty. The fact that this reference appears in an enemy inscription is crucial. The Aramean king had no reason to promote Israelite tradition. He was boasting of conquest, not validating someone else's history. This makes the mention of the House of David particularly significant as independent testimony. The stele was not discovered intact. Its fragments had been reused as building material centuries after its original erection. This secondary use is why the inscription survived at all. Ironically, destruction preserved what celebration might not have. The stone's broken condition mirrors the fragility of historical memory itself. Archaeologists carefully documented the stratigraphic layers surrounding the fragments. These layers confirmed that the inscription predated its reuse by several centuries. This careful documentation ruled out later forgery or intrusion, grounding the artifact firmly in its original historical context. The discovery quickly spread through academic circles. Initial excitement was tempered by cautious analysis. Scholars scrutinized every letter, debated reconstructions, and tested alternative readings. This process was rigorous and at times contentious, exactly how serious archaeology functions. Despite debate over minor details, the core reading remained stable. The phrase referring to the House of David fit both linguistically and historically. No alternative explanation accounted for the inscription as convincingly. Over time, scholarly consensus solidified around its authenticity. What makes the Tel Dan Stele extraordinary is not its size or artistry, but its implications. With a few words carved into stone, it provided external confirmation that David was not merely a literary figure, but the founder of a dynasty known to neighboring kingdoms. This discovery marked a turning point. The question shifted from "Did David exist?" to "What kind of ruler was he?" Archaeology had moved the debate forward, transforming skepticism into a more nuanced historical inquiry. In the next part, we'll examine the inscription itself more closely, what the phrase House of David means, why it matters linguistically, and how scholars interpret its significance within the broader landscape of ancient Near Eastern history. The most debated and consequential words on the Tel Dan Stele appear in a fragmentary but powerful phrase, the House of David. Though the stone is damaged, the wording fits a well-established pattern used throughout the ancient Near East to describe ruling dynasties. Kingdoms were often identified not just by territory, but by the name of their founding ruler. In this context, the phrase does not refer to a building or household in a literal sense. It refers to a political lineage. Just as Assyrian inscriptions speak of the House of Omri to describe Israel, the Tel Dan inscription uses the House of David to identify the ruling dynasty of Judah. This usage is consistent, conventional, and historically grounded. The language of the inscription is Aramaic, not Hebrew. This is important. It shows that David's name was known beyond Israelite tradition and had entered the vocabulary of neighboring kingdoms. The author of the stele expected his audience to recognize the term without explanation. That recognition implies familiarity, not invention. Some scholars initially questioned whether the inscription truly read David. Alternative readings were proposed, suggesting that the letters could refer to a place or another term entirely. These challenges were taken seriously and subjected to extensive scrutiny, including high-resolution photography, comparative epigraphy, and linguistic analysis. Over time, these alternative interpretations proved less convincing. The spacing of the letters, the grammatical structure, and the historical context all favor the reading House of David. While debate is a healthy part of archaeology, consensus gradually formed around this interpretation as the most plausible explanation. What makes this inscription especially valuable is its tone. It is not neutral or admiring. It is hostile. The Aramean king boasts of defeating the kings of Israel and Judah. David is mentioned not as a hero, but as the founder of a rival dynasty. This reinforces the inscription's credibility as independent testimony. The Tel Dan Stele also fits within a broader pattern of archaeological evidence emerging from the Iron Age. Other inscriptions, settlement patterns, and fortifications suggest the existence of organized kingdoms in both Israel and Judah during this period. The stele does not stand alone. It aligns with a growing archaeological framework. Importantly, the inscription does not confirm every detail of the biblical narrative. It does not describe David's battles, his personal life, or the extent of his kingdom. Archaeology rarely provides such detail. What it does confirm is existence, dynasty, and historical memory. This distinction matters. Archaeology is not designed to validate texts wholesale, but to test specific claims. In this case, it confirms that a dynasty known as the House of David existed and was recognized by foreign powers within a century or so of David's lifetime. For historians, this shifts the discussion significantly. David can no longer be dismissed as a purely legendary figure. The debate moves instead toward questions of scale, influence, and development. How large was his kingdom? How centralized was his rule? These questions replace earlier skepticism about existence. The Tel Dan Stele demonstrates how small fragments can carry enormous historical weight. A few surviving words, carved by an enemy, preserved a name that might otherwise have remained confined to tradition. This is one of archaeology's most powerful contributions to history. As we move forward, we'll examine what this discovery means for understanding ancient Israel as a whole, how it reshapes modern debates, and why the story of David continues to occupy a central place in discussions of history, archaeology, and memory. The discovery of the Tel Dan Stele fundamentally changed how historians approach the figure of King David. What was once a debate about existence became a discussion about scale, influence, and historical development. David moved from the realm of possibility into the realm of documented history, anchored by a foreign inscription carved in stone. This shift has broader implications beyond a single individual. It challenges outdated assumptions that early Israel lacked political organization or historical presence. The mention of a House of David indicates not only a ruler, but a recognized dynasty, one significant enough to be known and named by neighboring powers. Archaeology, however, has limits. It does not reconstruct lives in full detail, nor does it confirm every narrative element found in ancient texts. What it offers instead is a framework of reality. Within that framework, traditions can be evaluated, compared, and understood in their historical context, rather than dismissed outright. The Tel Dan Stele also illustrates how fragile historical memory can be. Had the stone not been broken and reused, it might never have survived. Entire chapters of history often depend on chance preservation. What we know is shaped as much by survival as by significance. Importantly, this discovery does not eliminate scholarly debate. Questions remain about the extent of David's kingdom, the nature of early Judah, and how political power developed in the region. Archaeology encourages these questions rather than ending them. Each new find adds clarity, but also complexity. The conversation surrounding David today is far more nuanced than it was a century ago. Instead of asking whether he existed, scholars ask how his rule fit into the broader Iron Age world. This represents progress. Evidence has refined the debate rather than silenced it. This pattern repeats throughout archaeology. Figures once considered legendary often emerge in fragments, names on stone, seals in clay, inscriptions on walls. These discoveries rarely tell complete stories, but they establish reality. David's case is one of the clearest examples of this process at work. The Tel Dan Stele also reminds us that history is often written by enemies as much as by allies. Rival kingdoms recorded conflicts, victories, and defeats without concern for preserving another culture's legacy. Ironically, this makes their testimony especially valuable. When archaeology and ancient texts are allowed to inform one another, history becomes more precise. The goal is not to replace tradition with artifacts, but to understand how memory, record, and material evidence intersect. In David's case, that intersection is undeniable. The story of David continues to shape religious, cultural, and political thought, but its foundation now rests on more than tradition alone. A broken stone from Tel Dan ensures that his name belongs not only to Scripture, but to history, If you value this kind of evidence-based exploration, where archaeology, inscriptions, and historical analysis come together, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Each video uncovers discoveries that clarify the ancient world behind familiar names. The first mention of David ever found does not tell us everything about the king, but it tells us something essential. He was real enough to be remembered by his enemies, carved into stone, and preserved against the odds. Sometimes history survives not through monuments, but through fragments, and sometimes those fragments are enough to change everything.